two speakers, Anthony Sassano and Kain Warwick. They are giants in the ecosystem. I don't know whether they like to be categorised that way, but the truth is both of them over a long period of time have committed to their positions. They're happy to back what they've done. You know, they've built things and they maintain a desire to help the community grow. Both of them are too busy to be here, and the truth is both of them are here. So I'm very grateful they've both been able to commit the time. So I said to them, just go nuts. So the aim here is pretty much to tell you about things you may or might not be thinking about and what this ecosystem looks like from their perspective. So I'll leave it to them both to do that. But thank you all. And I won't come back at the end. These boys are the ones that are going to finish the conversation for us today. So I welcome you both onto the stage.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve, for the intro.
Sitting everyone. Nice and close here.
Yeah. Very intimate session. Hey, everyone. How you going? I know this is the last talk of the day. You're probably all itching to get to the bars, so we'll keep it nice and interesting for you. As Steve said, my name is Anthony Sassano. I am an Ethereum educator in the space. Some of you may follow me on Twitter. I've been around for a little while, since about 2017, and yeah, just do a ton of Ethereum education. Kain, sitting right next to me, a lot of you will know him as well, founder of Synthetix and a bunch of other things. You do a lot these days. As Steve said, too busy to be here. But yeah, we're excited to talk about something different. I know a lot of the day has been focused on NFTs and metaverse stuff, but I think we're going to talk about DeFi, the kind of like layer one landscape, layer twos, all that sort of stuff, which obviously you're heavily involved in, Kain. And I have a bunch of questions that are on my phone. So I think for the crowd, I don't know how many people are familiar with like the intricacies of DeFi and kind of like where we came from, where we are today. I know DeFi's kind of like taking a back seat because it's all about NFTs and stuff these days. And I guess DeFi kind of had its moment and now is just being quietly building in the background. And you're obviously one of the top builders in the DeFi space, or at least part of a team of one of the top builders. Yeah, tell us about DeFi, like how, from your perspective, from like a founder's perspective, from I guess like before even DeFi Summer, because Synthetix has been around since for a very long time, right? It started off as Heaven and then went to Synthetix. But yeah, curious on your view and like where we were, you know, where we kind of went and where we're going, sort of thing within DeFi.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. And I guess if you came for NFTs, sorry to rug you with a DeFi thing to close it out. We'll try and make it not boring. So I think the story of DeFi is quite interesting because post-ICO boom, right? So 2016, 2017, we had a bunch of ICOs through into like early 2018. And then we had this bear market that kind of kicked in. And at the time, there was really nothing to do on Ethereum. There was like CryptoPunks, CryptoKitties, and like every time you did anything, the whole thing would collapse on itself. So it was this really weird situation where there was all of this, you know, hype and promise that like Ethereum is going to be amazing. We're going to do all this stuff. We're going to have prediction markets and on-chain insurance and, you know, identity and all this crazy stuff. But actually, nothing was built yet. And then we got to like mid 2018, and DAI had launched. And it was like the first really like complex DeFi protocol that was kind of like out there and working, and people were starting to be able to use it. You could borrow against your ETH. You could borrow this stable coin. You could use it to lever up and buy more ETH, which is, everyone was a degen, so that's all anyone was doing with it. And then we got to kind of the end of 2018, and there were probably like 10 other protocols. So like Set Protocol had launched, and there was you know, Compound and Lend, which turned into Aave. There was all this stuff that had kind of emerged, but no one had quite put together the fact that all of these things that were finally happening were all in the same category, which was like these financial applications, which made sense. It kind of annoyed Vitalik because he wanted us to do more than just finance stuff. It wasn't his favorite thing ever. But literally, like all of the applications that were built were all DeFi applications. But DeFi hadn't yet been coined. And so Brendan from Dharma and the Set Protocol guys were sitting in this chat room that they had, and they were talking about like the fact that this thing was emerging and like there was a pattern and what's going on, like all of these cool things that are being built are all like these financial applications, like what are we going to call it? And they were like debating open finance, which thankfully got shut down. And it came like to this term DeFi, right? And Brendan was like, let's call it decentralized finance. And so DeFi was born. And then about a month and a half later, after they coined that term, we had DevCon 4. So DevCon 4 was in Prague, and someone, I'm not sure, had a great idea of why don't we have a DeFi summit before DevCon, right? And so literally you had this thing where there was like every single DeFi builder, every protocol was in a room, and like the room was like this big, right? It was like not like this is like this would have been, you know, dwarfing everyone that was there. And so, you know, Maker and like all of these protocols were there. We're all there together, and we all kind of realized at that moment that like this was the thing that was actually going to take us out of this bear market. This was the thing that was going to save us. We were really building cool shit, and people were going to want to use it. And that kind of started off this wave that, you know, even through 2019 and eventually with the launch of the compound token, DeFi Summer, kind of really got us out of the bear market. But 2019, for most of the time, like people realized Ethereum is actually working, it's doing things. So that's kind of the history of DeFi and how we got here. And then obviously, you know, people kind of got bored with that and got excited about apes and punks and all that sort of stuff, which is fine. Like that's totally cool. I think that's what's going to take us mainstream. But DeFi is still in the background building.
Yeah, it's been funny to see how quickly DeFi evolved, given like in a short period of time, given that it took so long to get there in the first place. I mean, 2019 as a year felt like it went on forever. The market was extremely quiet. There were like not that many people around, and they were all building basically. And we all kind of had this vision, and we're like, you know, we think DeFi is going to be amazing, it's going to work, but the liquidity was super low. The volumes and trading volumes were low. Like there weren't many people interested in it at all, and there wasn't that much money to be made. But the primitives were there. And then, yeah, as you said, we had the compound token launch in 2020, which kicked off DeFi Summer. Some of you may have heard of that. It was basically a period of around 5-6 months, or where
American summer, by the way.
Yeah, sorry,
yeah, just to be clear. Yeah, it was like June until like August or something like that of 2020.
Yeah. And then there was a bunch of projects that got launched during that time. Yearn is another popular one. But then there were a lot of derivatives of those projects, or forks, as we know them in crypto, where most of them were cash grabs, right? I mean, we see this in the NFT space as well. Like anytime there's a mania around something, there's going to inevitably be a lot of cash grabs. So I think since then, DeFi has been in this kind of place where people lost interest in it, but there's a lot of building going on in the background, like a ton of it. And I think DeFi also suffered from the scaling woes of Ethereum, of course, which I mean, Ethereum's still kind of like working on today, but I guess that's a perfect segue into the next thing I wanted to kind of like talk about was because of Ethereum's scaling issues, we saw the rise of other kind of layer ones last year, right? And the Solanas, the Avalanches of the world, and you know, they're getting some traction. They have their own DeFi ecosystems, things like that. And then, you know, Ethereum has its own solution to scaling with layer 2s and things, but you know, layer 2s have been coming for quite a while. I mean, I know Synthetix was probably the first project to be building on a layer 2 in a really earnest way with optimism. So I'm curious, kind of like your view on the other layer ones. Everyone knows my view. I'm an ETH Maxi, so I mean, there's no point in me going into detail, but maybe you are too. But your view on kind of like the other layer ones and the layer 2 ecosystem as it is today, because yeah, you've been building on layer 2 since day one, basically.
Yeah, I think you'd have to fight me for ETH Maxi of the Year title in Australia. I think we might have an interesting competition there, but
I would win that competition very easily. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So it's true. So basically, I think what happened was, you know, around the time of like late 2019, Synthetix started this thing called yield farming, which turned into basically infinite Ponzi schemes, essentially, right? And so we had this situation where you had a bunch of like genuine economic activity that was happening, but then you had a bunch of speculative activity, right? That was like yield farming and like all of these forks and crazy farms and what have you. And we got to March of 2020 and there was this crash, right? And the crash that happened was the first time that I think most of the people who were building realized that Ethereum no longer could support the economic activity that was actually there, right? And so you had all of these different protocols and composability, and they were all connected together. And as soon as one thing moved too fast or too quickly or whatever, the entire thing fell apart. And that was the moment where I think the people who were building were like, fuck, like we need to do something about this, right? Like this is not okay. This is not going to work. We just have exceeded the bandwidth of this network, right? And so we immediately started looking around for scaling solutions. There were a few options out there. Starkware was out there. There were the kind of early optimistic roll-ups that had just emerged out of like Plasma and some of these like, you know, these scaling solutions that had been worked on for a long time. But then the Unipig demo happened with Optimism, right? And that happened like late 2019. And so we saw that and we're like, okay, this is going to work. Like optimistic rollups are the thing, and Optimism is going to be the one that actually does this. And so we immediately went to Optimism. We're like, we want to be the ones that kind of make this work, because we realized that Synthetix is just not viable on L1 anymore. And so we spent about a year working with them to get to the point where we could actually launch. We then launched, and then we had another year of painful scaling and all kinds of fun and games. But we're finally at a point now where I think that Optimism and Arbitrum and even maybe Starknet and a couple of other of the scaling solutions within the Ethereum ecosystem are ready to scale. The problem is, as you kind of pointed out, I mean, the problem if you're an ETH Maxi, it's not a problem if you're not an ETH Maxi, but if you are, it's a big problem, is that in the interim, while this was happening, we actually saw the emergence of like the first kind of new DeFi ecosystems on other chains, right? Previous to that, there was nothing, right? Like BSC, Binance Smart Chain, existed for like a year, and you could deploy smart contracts and literally no one touched it. Like no one ever deployed a smart contract. I think we would look at it and joke about the fact that like every block was empty forever, and like it was just a laughing stock, right? And we were like, this is what's going to happen when these other chains launch. And a bunch of other chains launched and not much happened, and then you just had this like tipping point of fees were so high on L1 that people had no choice. New entrants had to go to a different chain. And so then Solana and Avalanche and even Binance Smart Chain started to pick up traction, and they got these like kind of individual organic communities. And now there are people who are like Avalanche maxis, which was not like, I did not predict that that would happen, right? But there's people who only exist in the Avalanche ecosystem. They don't want to go to Ethereum. They don't care about Solana. They don't care about anything. They're like deep Avalanche people. And so we've got this first like fragmentation that, you know, I don't think we really expected. And now it's our job as ETH Maxis, as people building in the Ethereum ecosystem, to work out a way to like repatriate them, right? And like bring them back and you know, have this like homecoming back to like the mothership or whatever. And so that's what we're working on. And I think we will get there because the Ethereum scaling roadmap is much more robust than many of the L1s, and a lot of the L1s are already having scaling issues, all the alt L1s, and so I think we will get to a point by the end of the year where Ethereum is actually cheaper to use than a lot of these things, and at that point, the value prop for an alt L1 really starts to fall apart. So that's my story anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that. I also think, reflecting back on it, I guess like we were naive to think that this wouldn't happen, and you know, we were making fun of these other chains for having empty blocks and being ghost chains and all this sort of stuff. And yeah,
oh, I remember the ghost chain meme. That was good.
Yep. So that was very humbling, but I mean, it makes sense. I totally understand, and the fees were not just like high; they were really, really high. Like it was like hundreds of dollars just to withdraw from a liquidity position, right? Like provider position. So obviously, other things would come along and fill that demand. If they, you know, and just like any marketplace, really. And crypto is the freest marketplace in the world, in my opinion. So it happened. I look forward to the day that Ethereum doesn't have to worry about scaling anymore, because it's been a long time. I think we've been talking about scaling in earnest since the CryptoKitties crisis, and some of the ICOs in 2017 also caused fees to go up, but nowhere near what it was kind of like over like the past couple of years. But we've been talking about it for a very long time. The solutions have been worked on for a very long time, and I think people kind of got to the point where they're just like, well, is this actually happening or not? I'm just going to go somewhere else.
I mean, we were supposed to have E2 like 40 years ago, right? Yeah. So like, I think this is a problem that we've had for a long time, is we've been overly optimistic about the scaling roadmap. Yep. But I do think we are finally here.
Yes, yeah, so do I. I mean, even just like taking a view as not someone who is very close to the Ethereum ecosystem, I mean, they're live, right? There's no denying that these things are finally live. You can use them. They have cheap fees. The fees are getting cheaper over time. It's not like it's in kind of like dreamland anymore, which it was for a long time. And obviously, if you tell people something long enough and it doesn't materialize, they're going to stop believing it, right? It's just a pure narrative thing. But yeah, and it's been interesting to see.
You should talk to Cardano about that.
Yeah, Cardano. Yeah, I'll let my dad Charles know. There's a meme that Charles Hodgkinson is my dad, because he looks 50, but he's actually 35. But anyway, enough of that. Yeah, I guess you know, we talked about the scaling woes and things like that, but there's a lot of other things happening in the Ethereum ecosystem right now. I pay a lot of attention to what's happening with the core protocol stuff, the merge. I had a panel yesterday with Mehdi from Sigma Prime talking about all this sort of stuff. But I guess outside of that, and outside of DeFi, NFTs, you do spend a lot of time doing things within DAOs, and obviously Synthetix has been experimenting with governance and with DAOs and things like that. So I guess like, and that's actually very topical. I think over the past couple of days, I've had a few people talk to me about this, especially like from the regulators kind of point of view and stuff like that. So as someone who's been doing this for a long time, are you bearish or bullish on DAOs? Because you guys were a DAO and then you kind of went to a council model and like it's kind of like a pseudo DAO or something. So like, how do you view that whole kind of space?
I'm super bullish on DAOs. I think the issue with DAOs is that most of the DAOs, and MakerDAO I blame for the majority of this because MakerDAO was never really a DAO. You know, you can call yourself a DAO, but if you actually look under the hood and sort of see that really there's actually nothing happening on chain, there's a whole bunch of things that are you know, totally controlled by a few central people who are unelected authorities within a system, then it's not really a DAO. And I think that it's okay for you to launch as something that is centralized and eventually transition into something that's decentralized. One of the interesting things about Synthetix is that most of the people, even like deep DeFi people within the Ethereum community, do not realize how far Synthetix has actually gone in decentralizing. And when you actually talk to them and you explain to them how Synthetix governance works, they're like, wow, this is actually really surprising. I didn't realize how far you guys had gone down this path. But the tooling is still not there. And even within Synthetix, even as far as we push things, there's still a whole bunch of aspects of the system that are discretionary. Like, and they're at the discretion of a few unelected people that are in a multi-sig or something that could rug you or whatever. And yeah, there's checks and balances, and you've got a whole bunch of things to try and ensure that they are good actors, or you know, you have the right people or filter or whatever. But ultimately, there's still this trust, right? There's still a lot of trust in almost every project that eventually resolves down to a multi-sig. And so we've tried to fix that with a bunch of different things. We've got the compound governance module. We've got, you know, Yearn working on things. Synthetix is working on its own governance module. But eventually, we're trying to get to a point where we remove all of the trust and hand things over to the token holders. The problem is when you hand things directly to token holders, most of the token holders don't give a shit. And so you end up in a situation where they don't want to vote, they don't want to do things, they don't want to be responsible. And so the way that Synthetix has solved that is to say, okay, why don't we have like a delegated democracy, right? So we'll get them every 3 months, we'll force them to get out of bed and actually vote for someone that they want, and hopefully they don't just pick a random button and they pick a good person to be elected.
Obviously, that's not what we want, right, end of the day. And I think even just from like that, not even just the decentralization perspective, but also from the perspective of like if we're trying to build things that are kind of like resistant to, I don't know, attack and things like that, it just becomes like a point of attack essentially, right? For hacks and things like that. We've seen this play out plenty of times, right? So I think I'm very bullish on DAOs as well, but in their current iteration, besides maybe Synthetix, but a lot of them are just not great.
We have Yearn. Like there are good examples, I think, out there. I think the key though is that it's hard to force people to be good actors when you don't have the right tools, right? How are you supposed to force some project to have like full on-chain governance when full on-chain governance would actually destroy the project, right? So when we have the right tools, and I think we're getting closer, there are a lot of people working on a lot of different DAO tools out there. Once those tools are available and you can kind of compose them together to get something that works for your project, then I think it'll be easier for communities to push harder to say like, let's get rid of these trusted elements, let's get rid of the multi-sigs, let's get rid of all of these aspects, and let's actually go fully on-chain.
Yeah, no, I agree with that for sure. All right, changing gears here for a bit. So bear markets, are we in one? And what's the correlation with the macro market? I guess it's funny because you and I have both experienced multiple market cycles at this point, been through the bears, the bulls, they're different every time. And this market cycle has felt like totally different than all the other ones since 2013, since I've been in and out of it. And you've been kind of like, had a project with like a token that trades obviously publicly on markets and things like that. So do you think we're in a bear market? Do you think that we're in just a new paradigm because it's very different to the old kind of like cycles that we're used to? And I guess like also your opinion, since it's topical, on like the NFT market doing its own thing, right? The NFT market seems to just keep going and the rest of the market just stays quiet. So it's kind of, I don't think we've seen something like that before.
I think if you go back to like the early days, there was this kind of binary construct of like BTC and alts, right? So it was like, okay, it's BTC season, it's alt season, it's BTC season. Okay, we're wrecked on everything, right? That was kind of the three modes that you had, right? And I think we got to a point when ETH really broke out and all of the ICOs happened where alt season became kind of like not even alt season, it became like Ethereum season, right? And there were all of these Ethereum-based projects that started to kind of outperform, and that basically became DeFi summer, right? And so for the first time you had this like really micro segment of the market that was dominating outside of just all the alts together, right? Like Litecoin wasn't pumping while SNX was pumping, or Compound, or Aave, or whatever. I think that fragmentation has just continued, because now you've got NFTs, you've got alt L1s, you've got, soon you're going to have like Ethereum scaling solutions. You still have DeFi blue chips. You got DeFi 2.0. It's just, there's a proliferation of different categories now. And I think, like you have in equities, yes, correlations are high. And if, there's a war, everything, correlation goes to one, and everything kind of gets crushed. But in normal times, things kind of move somewhat idiosyncratically, right? And there'll be like one, tech stocks will move up, and then commodities will move down, or whatever. I think we're getting closer to a more mature market where that's what's going on. That said, I dropped this in the comments yesterday on the Bankless panel, but I don't know if it actually popped up. But someone was like, oh, bear market, and I like posted my tweet, which is like, we're still in a bull market, relax, which was like 6 months ago, and I still think we're still in a bull market, right? Like, yeah, even in 2016, we had so much sideways action for months at a time, and people were panicking. They're like, oh, it's over. It's like we're gonna get crushed again, or whatever. And like literally, by the time you zoom out that entire year, it's up only the entire time, right? And so I do think that, yes, we're in a bit of a lull. There's some macro headwinds, but the adoption that's happening across NFTs and a bunch of other things, and scaling and all of these other things, like, it's just, we're in a different paradigm now, in my mind. It's not just a purely speculative asset. We actually have things happening that are driving activity and driving awareness.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. And it's funny because I think that the market took a long time to come to terms with this. There are a lot of old school traders who would trade those, BTC season, alt season, and then they would think ETH is like this scam still and things like that. And then I think over the past kind of year, people have come to realize, okay, it's very different. There is not going to be these long kind of drawn out cycles that play out the same way every single time. Things are going to be separate, as you said. Like, there's going to be different categories. People are going to take different bets. And it's going and by virtue of that, it's going to become a lot harder to invest in crypto. You can't just throw money at anything and be rich anymore. I mean, maybe in NFTs, you can still do that. I haven't had any success there. But
not in the last month, I don't think.
But not unless you held a bored ape, then you're all right. But yeah, cool. All right, on to the next question. So I guess, given that a lot of people come into the crypto markets due to prices going up, due to money to be made, things like that, usually that's kind of like the main driver of people coming into crypto. And we've had a lot of that over the past year or two. We've had a lot of kind of people come from the Web 2 world. They want to build, they want to do things in every single category you can think of within crypto, especially within kind of like Australia. I've noticed there's a lot of people in Australia, especially that follow my work and kind of like tell me, like, I just got a job in crypto. I just moved from this and that, like a non-crypto job. And I love seeing that personally, but you have a Sydney-based kind of like team and everything, and you've obviously hired a lot of Australians and things like that. But like, are you seeing more people than ever come into the ecosystem? Like, what's it kind of like from a founder's perspective, and kind of like looking for talent and seeing what kind of talent, where they're coming from? Like, how does it compare to like a couple years ago even?
I think there's two components to it. One is that by necessity, we have to go outside of the core crypto industry, right? The talent pool is completely tapped out. There's no one who like has any idea what they're doing that is not hired already somewhere, basically. Yeah. And so, if you want to expand a team, or you want to go and hire 20, 30 people or whatever, you just by necessity have to look in Web 2 and other tech startups and other industries. And so I think the fact that so many people over the last year have been kind of drawn mainly, as you say, by this like speculative price action, has been amazing, because the pool of like crypto adjacent people, I don't think has ever been as big as it is now, right? And so to get someone, and like we recently brought someone into the Synthetix team who used to work at Combank. And she works in PR and is not like in finance per se, but like she's was a perfect person to bring in. She gets finance, gets how to talk about it, and she's been an amazing addition to the core contributors. If we went out and looked for a PR person who had like 2 years of crypto experience, like that person just, they might exist, but they're not hireable, right? And so I think we're just being forced to kind of go out and look and cast a wider net, which is good because it's bringing new people into the ecosystem. There is definitely a little bit of pain as you're trying to like dip someone in crypto for the first time and like explain wallets and all that sort of stuff. But I think we're getting better as an industry and as individual projects at onboarding people and getting people more comfortable. And so, yeah, like my advice to, I guess, everyone and all the projects that I mentor is like, look outside of crypto. If you're trying to find someone who's been in crypto for more than 6 months, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. I totally see that from my end as well. When I'm helping teams try to find people, I'd say to them, you want a community manager. Like, people think community managers are easy to find. No, they are very hard to find because being a good community manager in crypto means being a good memer, good shit poster. You have to know the culture, right? So I think they're even harder. Like, yes, you can go outside and you can teach people and things like that, but like for certain roles, it becomes very difficult. And just as well, a lot of roles like something like a Solidity developer, they're all taken, right?
And I mean, all of our community managers are all too rich now. They've all retired.
There you go, yeah.
That's the other problem
That's
as well.
a big problem crypto has. Everyone gets too rich and they don't want to work anymore. I think on that note as well, to lead me into my last question here, I guess best advice for those in the room, watching this or wherever they are, how to get started in crypto. Like if they're working in Web 2 or they're working in a non-crypto field altogether, like if they want to kind of like go out there and trying to get a job in crypto, I guess like what are things that they should be doing and kind of like shouldn't be doing and kind of like what do you reckon they should be kind of like working on in order to, I guess, have the right skills to come into this industry?
By far the most successful people who join crypto projects in my experience are the ones who come into a community, come into a Discord, usually it's Discords because almost every project runs on Discord now, come into a Discord and immerse themselves in the community, like really like get deep because every single community has their own culture, right? Synthetix has a culture. Like if you turn up to Synthetix and you are, pretending like you know what's going on, you'll be exposed very quickly because there's just certain terminology or whatever. Same thing for Maker, same thing with Balancer or Yearn or whatever, right? Like you can't pretend, you need to actually go in and get deep in there. The good thing about that is once you do that, every single project is under-resourced. Every single project has more things to do than people to do them, right? And so there will be many things as you kind of go deeper into a project that you're like, wait a second, why is no one doing this? Or like, why is this thing not happening? Or what if I could help out with this? And if you then go and volunteer and say like, hey, I actually think that I can have an impact on this specific thing, and you've identified, the projects will crawl over broken glass to get to you, right? It's not a difficult thing at all. But I do see a lot of people who kind of turn up and they're like, hey, I want to get into crypto, what do I do? And it's like the last thing that I have time to do is explain to someone how to get into crypto. Like you got to do it for yourself, right? If you're not willing to kind of get your hands dirty and jump in, then it's probably not going to be a great place for you to go. So I think that's like the best advice that I can give. And the people who've been most successful the fastest have been the ones who've just come in and just gone like full deep in the community, on community calls, like reading all of the blog posts and like really understand how that project works. And if you're interested in the project, that helps as well. But even if it's just you're generally interested in crypto, you don't need to care necessarily about like the project that much. You just need to be willing to immerse yourself. Mm-hmm.
I was actually going to say, out of everyone I know over the years in crypto, as you said, the most successful people by far are the ones who just absolutely immerse themselves in the culture, in everything got to do with the project, get to know it, actually become like the cultural leader, right? Like at the end of the day, which is in a special place to be. And I think what's really cool about it is that you can just literally jump into a Discord channel and immerse yourself in everything. It's that easy, right? I mean, easy in the sense to get started, but obviously you got to put in the work to really get the ropes.
There's no barriers to entry, right? Like there's no one that's going to like filter you and be like, you can't actually do this thing, right? If you turn up and you're like, hey, guess what? I now run the community calls. Like you will be allowed to run the community calls, right? No one will stop you. It's kind of crazy in that way. Like Synthetix has zero hierarchy, right? Yeah. There's no one in charge. It's utter chaos. If you turn up and you're like, hey, I can do this job, you will now be in charge of that job. So as long as you want to do it, you'll be fine.
Mm-hmm. And it's like completely different to centralized companies at the end of the day.
You can't turn up to Combank and be like, hey, I'm in charge of like the thing. Like that just doesn't work, right? In any, like even in a normal startup, you can't just rock up and say, hey, guess what? Like I now run this thing. But in almost every crypto project, you can get away with that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think as well, on the cultural side of things, you can't immerse yourself in the culture of a company unless you join the company, right? So, I mean, you can read about it, you can learn from other people potentially, but unless you're actually hired and get to work there, you're never going to experience the culture.
Like Discord is literally the office, right?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
you just walk into the office, you're like, hey guys, I'm here. What are we all doing, right? Like it's crazy, but that's the way it works.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. All right, I think we're up for time there. So thank you everyone for listening. Hopefully that was an interesting conversation. You can always reach out to me on Twitter if you like. I think Kane's busier than me, so don't do that for Kane.
You can reach out to me on Twitter. I just want to respond.
He's not going to reply. Yeah. So yeah, thanks everyone.